thanks for joining me. You are tuned in to Embodied Astrology. My name is Renee, and in this episode, I'm going to be offering a forecast and overview for the end of the year, the astrology of Sagittarius and Capricorn seasons in 2024. This is the span of time between late November, November 21st begins Sagittarius season until the solstice, December 21st begins Capricorn season. And this reading is going to take us through into the beginning of the 2025 calendar year until the end of Capricorn season, January 19th. So I'm offering this reading in a big chunk for a couple of reasons. First reason, I'm preparing for the 2025 year ahead annual readings for all 12 signs. This is something that I've done now for many years. And these readings are usually about 1 to 2 months of work. They are a deep meditation for me. They result in readings for every single sign that are generally between 1 and 2 hours long. This year they'll be accompanied with a self-care practice, an embodied awareness meditation, guidance for your year ahead. And the year ahead readings are full of all of the biggest themes, the opportunities and the challenges for your sign, your sun sign, rising sign, moon signs. If you know your astrology, you can actually listen to horoscopes or readings for the signs for all of your placements. And that can be fun if you have some time on your hands. So if you're interested in getting your 2025 year ahead reading, you can find the link just below in the show notes. You can also get your 2024 reading, and that reading still will have a lot to give. There are themes that are going to be continuous between 24 and 25, and the 2024 readings are currently on a big discount. And if you want to get a sense of how I read, that's a great way to do it, as is this episode. The second reason why I am offering this larger chunk of a reading, I usually just do one season at a time, is because of the retrogrades that we're working with. So Mercury retrograde and Mars retrograde are going to be big influences in both of these seasons and into the next year. And we are working with time spans that don't actually follow calendar years. And I really wanted to give some attention to these retrogrades and to these phases. And that brings me to reason number 3, which is there's a lot going on at the end of 2024. And I think a lot of people are experiencing some kind of anxiety around planning and not really knowing what's to come. Any astrologer doesn't really know what's to come either. So this practice is not a practice of predicting accurately specific events that are coming up on the horizon, but rather a map of energetic influences so that we can sense into the possibilities that we can co-create with the universe. Every time is a good time if you know what it's good for, is something that an astrologer I really admire has told me a number of times. And we can think about astrology like a bus schedule. Destination points are showing up in our view, and we can choose to get on the bus or not. We can choose how we want to work with these influences or not. And I hope that anything that I offer to you in this reading serves you in your greatest good and best outcomes, and therefore serves the greatest good and best outcomes for all involved. So thanks for tuning in. If you have just found your way here to Embodied Astrology, a little bit about me. Again, my name is Renee. I'm a second generation embodied astrologer. My mom raised me with the language of astrology and with practices of body work and somatic therapies. And these have been integrated in my consciousness for my entire life. I have also been totally enamored with these practices and languages since I was a young teenager. And I'm in my 40s now, and I have been ardently studying body work, somatic practices, and astrology for the better part of the last 2 decades. I identify as a queer person. I take a very queer read of astrology. My practice is deeply anchored in queering and decolonizing this language. And I think that that is an experiential kind of happening. So I do my best to offer you language for astrology that I hope really helps you tune into your own felt sense and your diverse potentialities. I don't want to offer you this language as a codex box for you to fit yourself inside in. I think every sign has so many gifts, so many opportunities, and some important challenges to be working with. I'm not here to be a fundamentalist about it. I am here to be in the learning of it. And I come to it from a very deeply spiritual place. I understand spirituality also as social engagement, and that is really deeply my practice. And so along with studying astrology and somatics and body work, I also am a student of social justice and transformative justice, and I do my best to bring in those views. And of course, I'm always learning. So please take what works for you and feel free to leave the rest. If you have comments, feedback, questions, praise, if you want to request any future episodes, you can also always do that in the comments or send me a DM. All right, let's go. As we get into the reading for today, I want to invoke the spirit of fire. We are entering into Sagittarius season, which of course is a fire sign. But as we move into the year of 2025 and beyond, there are some really big influences in fire that are going to be guiding us. And so as we start the reading today, I just want to call upon fire and the essence of animation, the spirit of inspiration, and the warmth of life to come and guide my words, this transmission, and anything that might be of service to you. I'm gonna light a candle. There's the spark. Here's the continuity, the body of the flame. This is a candle made by Taylor Ursula, another wonderful astrologer and guide. You can find their candles and their work at It's So Pisces. And this candle actually is a Pisces candle, and I am recording for you on November 13th. It's a Wednesday, it's Mercury's day, and the light of Pisces is rising on the Eastern Ascendant where I am, on the stolen lands of the Chinook, the Multnomah, the Kalapuya, the Molala, many tribes and bands that have lived in the Pacific Northwest of Turtle Island and still do tend this land. This is a land that is abundant with many forms of life. And I want to really invite a sense of depth and animism and honoring and respect for the land into this reading, and I hope that it can guide me and guide us. And then I also want to start today with a quote from Joanna Macy, and I'll include the link from this article in the show notes if you want to find it for yourself. So Joanna Macy, one of the foremothers of the intersections of Buddhism and embodiment and socially engaged action and healing work, says, yes, it looks bleak, but you are still alive now. You are alive with all the others in this present moment. And because the truth is speaking in the work, it unlocks the heart. And there's such a feeling and experience of adventure. It's like a trumpet call to a great adventure. In all great adventures, there comes a time when the little band of heroes feels totally outnumbered and bleak, like Frodo in The Lord of the Rings or Pilgrim in Pilgrim's Progress. You learn to say, it looks bleak. Big deal. It looks bleak. Our little minds think it must be over, but the very fact that we are seeing it is enlivening. And we know we can't possibly see the whole thing, because we are just one part of a vast interdependent whole, one cell in a larger body. So we don't take our own perceptions as the ultimate. My worldview has been so interwoven between the Buddhist teachings and living systems theories. They inform each other so powerfully. Beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them all. This may be the last gasp of life on earth. And what a great last gasp. If we realize we have fallen in love with each other, what a great last gasp. If you're really in the moment of experiencing our reality, you don't say, oh, I won't experience this because it's not going to last forever. You've got this moment. It's true for now. we can have a reasoned concern about what's down the track without necessarily getting hooked on something having to endure. So, wanting to offer that as we enter into the realms of Sagittarius season. Sagittarius is a fire sign, and it is what's considered to be mutable fire. This is fire that is changing. And another way to language that is that Sagittarius represents the fire that spreads. We might consider Sagittarius in the embers of a fire, as they might be buried underground, kept warm in hiding for another fire to begin, or carried from one hearth to another so that multiple fires can be lit. We might also think about fire as the animate principle, the principle of inspiration and creativity and action, the feeling that we get when we are fired up and turned on, and how that feeling is shared and spread amongst us when we cultivate together and build fire. And Joanna Macy is such an amazing fire tender and fire keeper, so I'm really grateful to her for offering her words. And in that quote that I just shared, she is definitely speaking about the time that we're in, about this era of the Anthropocene, which has also been named by some as the Necrocene or the Afrocene, a period of time in human development when human impact has become the greatest destructive force on Earth. And this period of time specifically is coordinated around lineages of colonization, enslavement, extraction, industrial growth that has turned the world into a site of extraction for many and really severed us from our connection with its deep life-giving abundance and generosity. And in so doing, separated us from each other and built mindsets in human beings that are very individualist, and in that way sometimes we're brave or courageous or maybe totally reckless and hasty, but we are also really scared in individual individualist experiences, and that kind of fear that we are all alone or that we can't rely on one another, or that there isn't like communal spaces of belonging where we can dependably get what we need and be held by others, leads to hoarding and greed and grasping. And these are some of the influences that are dominating the experience of life on planet Earth right now, and really creating a situation that feels pretty dire. It feels pretty bleak. I know a lot of people, particularly folks in the so-called United States, are feeling potentially very bleak and defeated and depressed after the recent election. I know some people out there are not feeling those ways and might be feeling fired up, enthusiastic, and excited. And I think that there are folks who are feeling fired up, enthusiastic, and excited who are not on the right. So I told you already, I'm a queer politicized astrologer. I'm not coming from a far right perspective, but I am coming from a perspective that feels somewhat enthusiastic and excited and fired up, because this is a moment of change. And I didn't personally think the Democratic Party was going to get us there, although I hoped that they would win, because I wanted security and stability in the way that I thought maybe I could hold on to it for another couple of years, and in that time continue to build and work for protection for the people and the beings and the animals and the land that need protection, work for rights, work for liberation, etc. That was not what happened, and so we have an opportunity of a crisis moment as fascist fundamentalists are taking over all branches of government. And resistance builds strength. The last time the Big Orange came into office, there was an incredible movement of resistance, and a lot of people woke up who maybe had never really paid attention ever. And I don't put myself in the category of having never paid attention ever, but I do put myself in a category of having been somewhat sleepy, and in 2016 really got a wake-up call. And I feel that that call has been resounding now for the last 8 years. A lot of people are very concerned because they know that the right has learned a lot since their previous administration, but so has the so-called left, so has the progressive movement. And I think that there is a lot of fire that can meet the fire. I gave an Instagram live recently, and I was talking about we can meet fire with fire, but the fire of fire power that they're promising, the hell and brimstone kind of fire, the engulfing enemies in flames kind of fire. The fire that we have to meet that kind of fire with is the fire of the heart. It's the fire of love. It's the fire of joy. It's the fire of inspiration. It's the fire of good humor. And it's the fire of devotion. And I'm going to say that it is the fire that sustains. The fire power that they are promising is the fire that destroys. But the fire that sustains is the fire of love. And it is the fire of inspiration and enthusiasm and life. So that word enthusiasm is a very Sagittarius word, and it means in its etymology to be with God, to be full of God. And Sagittarius is a sign that is ruled by the planet Jupiter in the language of astrology, in the codex of astrology. And Jupiter co-rules Pisces. I'm starting this reading today with a Pisces rising. The moon is in Aries, a fellow fire sign. I'm recording for you from Scorpio season, but Sagittarius is up at the top of the sky right now. So we are really calling in Jupiterian energy. And Jupiter as a planet is the big gassy giant. It is a planet in our solar system that scientists say helped all the other planets come into orbit. After the sun, it is the largest body in our solar system. And Jupiter is the brightest, quote unquote, star in the sky. It's visible right now. If you are in the northern hemisphere, just a little bit after the sun goes down, Jupiter is rising on the eastern sky. And you will see it. It is big, it is bright, and it is beautiful. And our ancestors and contemporary peers sometimes call Jupiter the shining one. And Jupiter is said to be the great benefic, the great gift giver, the teacher or the guru, the one that opens the doors of opportunity and grants luck. We can promote the benefic energies of Jupiter when we ourselves are really anchored in benefic qualities. So generosity is one of the ways that we can honor Jupiter. We can really tune into our inner morals and our inner ethical practice. We can cultivate and develop our awareness of our own morals and our own ethics. Let's please not keep them only in one form throughout our lives. We definitely need to keep working them, keep cultivating them, keep growing them. And we do that by expanding our minds, which is another way to honor Jupiter. The more that we can learn, the more capacity that we have for generosity and understanding how big picture kinds of things work. And the signs of Sagittarius and Pisces, Jupiter's domains, are big picture kinds of places when we're thinking about their manifestations symbolically. Sagittarius brings us into the realms of faith and philosophies, guiding principles, and astrology. Any of the practices that help us kind of see the big reason. So unifying principles or ideologies that really can help us anchor through times of struggle. And as I'm saying that, you probably can think of a million manifestations of guiding principles and personal philosophies and ideologies that also can lead to harm. And this is definitely something that we want to be careful with Jupiter. In mythologies, Jupiter is related with Zeus, the god of the gods. And in the Greek stories about Zeus, he's kind of a fucker, to be honest. I mean, he's out there raping, he's out there stealing, he's out there taking whatever he wants and making a justification for it. And sometimes he also has some great ideas. He can totally be helpful, but he really epitomizes the kind of role of like the patriarch. And that is definitely part of his mythology and his relationship with Saturn, another patriarchal figure. And Saturn is currently in Pisces, Jupiter's other home. Before we get into Saturn, a few more words about Jupiter's domain. So where Saturn is right now in Pisces, the light that's rising, guiding this reading, this is the place of the everything. And Pisces is sometimes a symbol of what the atmosphere is full of. And the atmosphere is full of so much that we can't see and yet are very deeply affected by. So that can include the molecules of our breath. It can include chemical molecules that travel into our breath. It can include the emotional substances and psychic frequencies that are traveling through the collective unconscious at any given time. You can think of Pisces as the general field and environment in which phenomena is emerging. And at least in our current paradigm of modernity, there isn't really much substance given to what we perceive as substanceless. And so a lot of people will talk about empty space, or they might think that just because they can't see something, that it doesn't exist, or just because they can't explain it with a logic that they call scientific, that somehow it is wrong. But Pisces is the sign of the ineffable and the liminal and the intuitive, as well as the deeply, deeply spiritual and potentially also the psychic. And so there are so many things that we can't see and we can't explain and go against all logic and all reason, but still happen. Science has yet to tell us why we're here. The stories that we tell become the realities that we live inside. And so Pisces also as a symbol is associated with the great dream, with Maya, with the illusion, the ways that we are inside of our experiences, and these experiences are held in containers of materiality. And materiality holds the substance of stories and narratives, right? And here we go back to Jupiter's other sign, Sagittarius. The substance of stories is often built upon foundations of ideologies, which in turn form institutions, which build material structures, which create environments that we think are real and permanent. But everything is changing, and nothing came from nowhere. And everything that is arising now will turn into something else. And what it turns into is beyond anything that we can plan for, predict, or know, because the nature of change is chaotic. And the nature of change is that it is beyond our control. And so in order to be in the flow with change, we have to employ Jupiter's domains. We have to employ these energies. So we might want to work with philosophies or practices like astrology that can help us chart our course and plan and prepare for what cannot be planned or prepared for. And what that means is tuning in with our spirit, tuning in with our essence, and then working through our spirit and through our essence, through our felt sense, with the invisible, with the liminal, with the intuition, and maybe with the spiritual or with the ancestral, including the future ancestors who might be reaching back into the past, into the now, wanting to work with us. So as we enter into Sagittarius season, we are entering a time when many people are feeling the dying of the light. And in the Northern Hemisphere, Sagittarius season describes the dying of the light. We are headed towards the winter solstice on December 21st. This is the beginning of Capricorn season. It is the darkest time of the year up here in the north. And we live in a somewhat dualistic kind of experience in human bodies. So dark is created by the experience of light. The experience of light only exists because we have the experience of dark. And so at the darkest time of the year, we have to remember the brightest and the warmest time of the year. And Sagittarius is that fire. So as we go into the darkness, whether you are thinking about the winter solstice, whether you're thinking about the age of the Anthropocene, whether you are thinking about something personal in your own life or experience, or maybe something that you just do every single, hopefully, day when you go to sleep, there is something that you are carrying into that dark space. And Sagittarius represents that. This is the fire that spreads and that sustains. So what are the fires that keep us going through dark times? This is the fire of belief, the fire of faith. This is the fire of storytelling. Sagittarius as an energy loves a good yarn, because a good story or a good myth, especially one that is about an adventure, is a key Sagittarius word, can really sustain us in times that feel bleak. And so as we move into Sagittarius season, it is a really good time to gather, to share warmth, and to remember that you too can stoke and cultivate the warmth that lives in you. And you can do that through whatever brings you close to a sense of larger perspective, close to a sense of adventure, and close to your own will to give what you have to give to this one and precious life, which surely at some point will end. And that awareness of ending brings us again to Pisces as a theme. So the 12th sign, Pisces, some astrologers will say Pisces is the collecting space for everything else that doesn't really find its place in all the other signs. And as a collecting space, or as the atmosphere, or as the great ocean, Pisces is also the place of endings, where we let go of the self. And therefore it's the place of beginnings, because nothing comes from nowhere, and as selves, we exist inside of these bodies only because of the many, 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 many beings who made up the environment and the opportunities that allow us to be here. Okay, so let's get into some chart reading. I am going to look at the chart for the Sagittarius ingress, season ingress, and then I'm also going to be working with a little drawing that I made of Sagittarius season as some choreography, and we'll be sharing those with you too. So I'm working with the chart for my particular location. I'm not really going to be talking about the houses, because the houses will change no matter where you are. I'm going to be focusing on what comes through for me in this particular chart. I'm not going to spend too much time getting into the didactic nature of astrology, where it's like this planet, this sign, this thing. I'm more going to give a general read. And again, take what works, leave the rest. Remember that I'm offering this in a particular moment in time, so there's definitely going to be a lot of things that later I wish I would have said differently, not said at all, felt like I forgot, etc. So I leave it to you to fill in the blank spots. Sagittarius season begins on November 21st. And as soon as the sun moves into Sagittarius, the very first aspect that it makes is a sextile to Pluto. And Pluto has recently, like in the last week and a half, entered Aquarius for the final time. And Pluto has entered Aquarius 2 times previously to this over the last 2 years or so. Pluto is an outer planet, it takes 250 years to orbit the sun. That means that it spends a really long time in every sign. And it has been in Capricorn since 2008. And now it will tenant Aquarius until 2043, I believe. So we have 20 years with Pluto in Aquarius, and students of astrology will know that Pluto in Aquarius cycles are periods of time that bring revolution. This is a period of time when the substance of Aquarius, and Aquarius is an air sign, all of the air signs have to do with human experiences and with people, and Aquarius represents humanity as a whole, many people, groups of people, cultures, nations, globes full of people. Aquarius also as an air sign represents the pathways of consciousness and intelligence and information that travel between people. And Pluto is the great transformer. And so when we're working with Pluto, we are working with the essence of life that is about transformation. And transformation is a word that a lot of astrologers and like spiritual practitioners and hippies like love to use, and we use it in ways where we're like, yay, transformation. But transformation is gnarly to experience in human spacesuits, like these meat suits, because it is ultimately about death. And the nature of nature is that life is ongoing, but also cyclical. And cycles of life are also cycles of death. So everything that comes into form has to break down. And because what comes into form also has an instinct to live and to sustain, part of a life cycle is attachment to life. Like an important part of living is being attached to life. And our attachments to life are biological. They exist in our brain stems and limbic systems. They are the instincts that keep us moving towards life and away from death. Sometimes in very explicit, obvious ways, like jumping out of the way if a car is coming at you or something like that. But oftentimes in implicit and weird and kind of like psychological or subterranean ways. And that could look like control, right? Like trying to control something is usually a symptom ultimately of a fear of death. And so you might just like check that out for yourself for a second. You might tune in with some part in your life right now, because I know everybody experiences this all the time, where you want to control something. Maybe you want to control somebody else. Maybe you want to control the future. Maybe you want to control your own body. Maybe you want to control your own desire. And a lot of times we're not conscious of wanting to control something, but we might be conscious of wishing that something could be other than it is. And the feeling inside of our body of getting gripped on a desire for something else to be other than what it is, when we blow that feeling up, that is control. That's a desire to control. And desires to control are natural. Just hang out with like 2-year-olds, everybody for the most part like is really wired to want to live, right? And to be attached to their own experience. But desires for control can also become very, I'm going to say, unnatural. And I mean this in a purely human context. So human beings with all of our gifts of opposable thumbs and critical thinking and storytelling and the ability to group together in large numbers and like form societies and civilizations, human beings get very unnaturally attached to control. And what I mean with this unnatural is that we lose our connection with the earth. We lose our connection with the natural flow of things. And when I spend time not with humans, I might observe like, other animals fighting each other, and fighting for their lives or something like that. And I'm certainly not inside the existence of another species. So I don't know what's going on, in their psychology and intimate conversations. But at least when I'm tuned in with like a landscape, I spend a lot of time in forests and I feel like I have a deep relationship with rocks and trees. Nature gives way to itself, right? And so if you think about a tree, trees will live until they don't live anymore. And then when they die, they become food for the forest. And their breakdown leads immediately to new life. And again, I could be wrong. I don't know what's going on in the psychology of other life forms, but I feel like human beings are maybe alone in our experience as life forms on Earth, in the sense that we really try and resist the natural forces of evolution and time, and that we really try and resist breakdown. Now, not everybody, many people are hospice workers and doulas, and they are well practiced and well versed in cultural methodologies and indigenous practices and personal understandings of intimacy with death and really being with death in ways that are about being with life. But I'm going to say that inside of modernity, and certainly inside of the present moment and what's happening like geopolitically, there is a lot of grasping at keeping things the way that they have been and maybe trying to get things to be the way that they were. Here in the US, there is a push by a group called the Heritage Foundation to like take society back to the 19th century, like into a time before slavery was abolished, into a time when cis men owned women's bodies, like literally owned them, into a time when the only people who had power were white, cis Christian men who were landowners. So that's psychosis, in my opinion. That's actually a deep mental illness, to be that attached to what no longer is and what is changing. To me, that's like, you know, you need treatment. And not the kind of treatment that those systems impose upon a lot of bodies who are simply expressing like neurodiversity or totally appropriate responses to the fuck shit of like life and capitalism, etc. But the kind of treatment that can only take place inside of community with accountability and with deep somatic release work. And when I tune in with Pluto, I feel the forces of control and the mechanisms that move through the human psyche that seek control, and that seek control through violence and coercion and manipulation. I am also tuned in with the natural forces of death, decay, regeneration, transformation. And I'm also tuned in with the ways that human beings can practice transformation. And this includes investigation psychologically, spiritually, and somatically. A moment ago, I was talking about like a somatic release process. And I think that Pluto, when we're working intelligently with it and its energies, can help facilitate this kind of thing. Some people have experienced this through the assistance of plant medicine and psychedelics. Some people have experienced this through deep meditation. Some people experience this through dance or other kinds of body practices. Some people experience this through illness and like near-death experiences, and really going through some kind of process where they reach the edges of their own control. They touch into the inevitability of their own death. And in that, they experience big catharsis and relaxation around the rigidity where their minds and their hearts and their psyches were trying to be right and trying to control and trying to like be this kind of person or not that kind of person, or they thought that they knew. And everyone who I've ever read about or talked to who has had a near-death experience or who has gone through a near-death kind of journey with chronic illness or violence or abuse or something like that, every single one of those people talks about the moment of release, like the moment of an ego death that then allows life energy and life force to come flooding back in. And there's a big rearrangement of priorities in that. There's a lot of clarity that can come through that. And a lot of people have experiences of suddenly waking up to like, wow, whatever I thought was so important, all the ways that I was fighting for my ego, all the ways that I was carrying these petty grievances and frustrations around, I don't need to do that. And they put it down, and then they get a second chance or maybe a third chance or something like that. And life is renewed. But the only way that regeneration and transformation can happen is through some kind of death process. So Pluto is at the very first degree of Aquarius. It will be transiting Aquarius for the next 20 years. Aquarius is the sign of the people. It's the sign of systems in the way that all systems are interlocking. This is like biodiversity, right? Like Because insects exist, so do human beings, right? Because there are ocean currents working the ways that they do, there is food growing in the ways that it does, which means that other kinds of animals have sustenance. Like, systems need each other. There is no such thing as systems operating in isolation. And Aquarius is the intelligence of that, the capacity to map that and the reality of it. Aquarius is also representing technology. And inside of technology, there's a lot of things that are happening right now that are totally full of potential. And we are living in a climate crisis, and a lot of people are really working very intelligently with technology to address the problems that human beings have created. The potential of mass media communications, of the internet, of this kind of distribution includes all kinds of things, and some of it is really good. And the ways that we are able to share and distribute information amongst ourselves can also lead to revolution. And technology is a medium for control and manipulation. It's also a place that is transforming rapidly, particularly as artificial intelligence begins to pervade everything that we are interacting with. If we're interacting with the internet, with devices, with media, basically like anywhere that you live that has an electrical grid, anywhere that you live that might be influenced by anything technology related, is being affected by artificial intelligence. And then, of course, we have weapons of war, and war certainly is a human condition of suffering. It has existed for a really long time. It's something that people have been fighting against and fighting for and trying to grapple with, like, forever on some level, probably. But the way that technology is being developed right now, specifically to destroy, I think that's one way that we can consider Pluto in Aquarius. So my prediction of Pluto in Aquarius the next 20 years is that this is a period of time when humanity has to collectively ask, what does it mean to be alive? And what power do human beings have? We clearly have the power to destroy one another. That is not in question. There is a longer cycle at work between Pluto and Neptune, and I'll get to Neptune in a little bit, that has been building since the end of World War II. That is really, I think, asking this question. You know, we have the power to destroy every living thing on Earth. There are enough nuclear weapons in the country where I live to destroy every living thing on Earth. Human beings individually have the power to destroy each other. We can destroy each other through physical force, through psychological force, through emotional force, through negligence. But we also have the power to create. And we have the power to heal. And in many ways, the powers that we have to create and heal are the powers that are most unknown at this time. And when we come together, if we can come together in our diversity, across our differences, speaking our many languages, moving our many ways, if we can come together, there is actually really profound possibilities of what we can do, and the power that we have to create together and the power that we have to heal together is infinite. It is possible that we could have win-win-win-win-win situations. The winner-loser binary is something that human beings made up. The Earth is a win-win-win-win-win model, right? Like, somebody's yuck is another person's yum. Poop falls in a forest and a whole lot of microorganisms go yum yum. Many different species live together. There are checks and balances. There are harmonies. We live in an organism. We are part of an organism that is a truly abundant intelligence. And human beings are young. The Earth is old, much older than us. And in our naivety and notions of self-supremacy, we've become really divided. We've become divided from one another and divided from the earth. And we live in a world at war. And we live in a world that is exponentially being destroyed by war. And I'm definitely talking about the US funded war on Gaza. I'm definitely talking about the wars and genocides that are happening all over the planet, in Somalia, in the Congo, in Ukraine. I'm definitely talking about abuse and the ways that people are harmful to one another consistently and insistently. And I'm definitely talking about the ways that we are at war with ourselves. And this is something that the far right, fundamentalist, fascist ideologues all over the place are really promoting. They are promoting fear mindsets, and they are promoting conformity, because they know that if we're at war with ourselves, then we will be submissive to them. If we think that our bodies can't express in the ways that they naturally want to express love or sexual attraction, then we will be horrible to one another and we will repress and abuse one another. So Pluto's tenure in Aquarius, I think, is a moment in time when humanity is really going to be faced with the possibility of our own extinction. We already are, but I think that this possibility is going to be magnified really extremely over the course of these next 2 decades. And my hope is that this is also a period of time when we're going to see a lot of collectivism and collective action, because the only way that we are going to be able to fight and win against the forces of oppression and fascism is if we're all together. The only way that we can take over the power that the governments and military have imposed upon us is if the people who run those institutions revolt and we join forces. And what we're joining forces for is a win-win-win-win-win situation. Because there is enough. And we can actually live here in beautiful ways together. We do not need to work our entire lives. We do not need to enslave each other. We do not need to ruin this beautiful place that gives us so much. And if we work together, there is actually so much that we can have. So the sun makes its very first aspect upon arriving in Sagittarius to Pluto in Aquarius. And this is how I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it as the opportunity to start sharing new stories about the adventure that we are on. And the adventure that we're on right now includes a massive battle and a big enemy. And the enemy is within. The enemy is the enemy of divisiveness and self-hatred that manifests externally as violence and othering. It is the enemy of isolated greed and hoarding and instincts to control and grasp and have absolutely everything that we can to feel insulated against the inevitability of death. But we will fight the enemy by opening our hearts to the inevitability of death and living like this is our one and only opportunity to live, which it is. So we are going to live here abundantly. We are going to live here joyfully and enthusiastically, and that means God is with us. Spirit is with us. It is moving through us, and therefore it is moving through the collective. As we move into Sagittarius season, we are moving from the last quarter moon towards the new moon, and we'll have a Sagittarius new moon on November 30th. This is a new moon at 9 degrees of Sagittarius. It is trine with the North Node in Aries, and it is trine with Mars. Mars has recently entered Leo, and just about a week after the new moon, Mars will be stationing retrograde. So this is when Mars has slowed down in the sky. It is preparing to station retrograde, and that makes it incredibly powerful. Retrograde is an apparent phenomena. It has to do with the difference in speed between Earth and Mars as we orbit the sun and our visibility of that red planet. But whenever a planet is preparing to station retrograde and it appears to pause in the sky, that means that it's holding still as a symbol in one particular degree point in our charts and also in the collective chart. So if you're a person who likes to work with your own chart, you might consider 6 degrees of Leo for yourself, because that is the retrograde station point of Mars. That happens to be my ascendant, and I'm pretty curious to see what comes with this retrograde. But getting back to the new moon. So the new moon at 9 degrees of Sagittarius is part of a grand fire trine with the North Node in Aries and Mars in Leo. This degree of Sagittarius encourages us to let go of definitions of individual success and build the momentum of collective effort. When we work together, we can have so much more than we can imagine for ourselves. And the first week and a half or so of Sagittarius season, as we move into the season and approach this new moon, is asking us to let go of the ideas that we have held so precious about our own lives and our own futures. I'm going to say, especially for those of us who experience class privilege or protected status here in the so-called United States, as we are facing the threats of the upcoming administration. We are facing threats that many of our human siblings have faced for generations already, that they're currently facing. And a lot of us, and I definitely put myself in this group, have had a lot of ideas about like what we're going to do with our lives. And, you know, we have our future goals and our future plans, and a lot of those are being very threatened at the moment. So this is a great time to let them go. If they happen, they happen, and that will be the universal will moving through your body, and you can give thanks at that point. But nothing is guaranteed in this life except for death, and this is a great time to just let go of your attachments, again, to future plans, and really kind of tune in with what are the opportunities right now, what is being presented right now. Now, as we're moving towards a dark moon, it is natural that energy also is waning. As I mentioned before, I think a lot of people are feeling really depressed, really defeated, really scared. That totally makes sense. I have my moments also, and I'm sure I will have many, many more. And I think that this period of time might give lots of opportunities to feel depressed, to feel defeated, and to feel fearful. This is also a period of time when we will be working with a Mercury retrograde. So we enter into Sagittarius season in the shade, or the pre-retrograde shadow, and Mercury is stationing retrograde on the 25th of November. So not only is Mars stationary at the new moon, but Mercury will have also recently stationed, and it will be moving very, very slow. So also very, very powerfully. And you might want to check out where is 22 degrees of Sagittarius in your chart. Now, as Mercury is stationing, we're in a period of time in the Mercury cycle that correlates with the mythic figure Epimetheus. And some of you might know about Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, and I will be talking about him again in a little while. But first, let's talk about his brother, Epimetheus. So when Zeus, right, the patron of Sagittarius and Pisces, otherwise sometimes also called Jupiter, when he found out that Prometheus had stolen fire from the gods to give to human beings, he was pissed. And what did he do but send a box that looked like maybe a gift to Epimetheus, who was Prometheus's brother. And Epimetheus opened the box, and out came storming and flooding all of the woes and struggles and griefs and violences of humanity. So out came strife, and out came loneliness, and out came manipulation, and out came jealousy, and out came abuse, and out came psychosis, right? Like out came every single thing that we can think of, all of the horrors. And Epimetheus is stunned and scared, because what just got released? But then he looks down into the box, and there's one little spirit finding its way up to the top. And the very last spirit to leave the box is the spirit of hope. And so when we are in a period of time, such as this one is, in this moment before Mercury stations retrograde, and then as it moves into the first part of its retrograde cycle, many astrologers liken this part of the Mercury phase to an epimethean phase. And so this is a period of time when our minds may be besieged by all of the things that can go wrong, that have gone wrong, that will go wrong, and that are going wrong. We might be inclined to pay a lot of attention to what we're needing to protect ourselves from. There might be feelings of despondency and feelings of depression and despair, and that would be normal given that Mercury is also a microphone and a broadcaster and a symbol of communication. And in fiery Sagittarius at this time, we're probably going to be hearing a lot of news that will be giving us great examples of all of the things that are horribly wrong. And during this period of time, there is a really remarkable quality, I think, of suspense and uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen, but it could be, and it probably will be, really bad in a lot of ways. We're going to lose a lot of people. We might lose a lot of ground. There will be a forced review of the conditions that have brought us here. And that means the environmental conditions that have been built over time, as well as the conditions of ideology and the ideological landscapes that have resulted in this particular moment. There will probably be really disconcerting events that are happening and thoughts then that are emerging that force us to review our internal landscapes. And we want to read the signs right now. We need to look at the harms, we need to look at the horrors, we need to look at the past in order to really understand what is happening in the present. This is also a period of time where it could feel like there are some abrupt departures from what we thought we knew, and then a kind of descent into what feels very unknown. Venus is in Capricorn during this time, and I'm going to say that that is also really going to be affecting us in the ways that we feel in our bodies and inside of our relationships. Venus in Capricorn on some levels can lead to a kind of contraction. It can breed a sense of mistrust or guardedness or self-preservationism. It can definitely be a symbol that is highlighting the powers of the state and militancy. But on a more positive note, it can be a symbol that really helps us to anchor in our commitments, to sense our strength and fortitude, and really importantly, to connect with ancestral sustenance. And we have to remember that many of our ancestors have lived through periods of time where intense oppression was happening. Many of them did not live through, but somehow there was enough survival that you and I are here now, and a lot of what we need and what we can draw upon has been preserved in the archives of our bodies, in our cellular intelligence, in the ways that we instinctually know to create barrier and container around what we hold most precious. So in this first week and a half, as we move towards the new moon in Sagittarius, I'm going to say that this is a really powerful time for reviewing philosophies and ideologies that you might be nurturing, and realizing that no longer do these philosophies or ideologies serve you or serve the ones who you love. This would definitely be a great time to be paying attention to what people in leadership are saying and noticing what kinds of stories they're telling. Who is telling stories of resilience and survival that actually align with life on Earth? Life on Earth is not conformity. Life on Earth does not only wear gray and navy suits and ties. Life on Earth does not all have the same haircut. life on Earth does not all prescribe to the same religion. Life on Earth does not have the same customs in all bodies. So there are lots of leaders right now who are spouting off and telling big stories about communalism that have to do with conformity. And they are promising some kind of promised land if we just get in lockstep with what they're trying to get us to do. And many of them are not trying to tantalize us into lockstep. They are threatening and trying to coerce us with fear. And there are a lot of reasons to feel afraid, and there are a lot of things that we want to preserve and want to protect. But we will not be able to preserve and protect the essence of what is life-giving if we allow ourselves to collapse into fear. And so this is definitely a time to tune in with the leaders who are telling stories of resilience through diversity. How can we come together from the many, many places where we are and work together brilliantly and effectively for life? I just became a paying member of the Working Families Party. I'm going to include their link in the show notes. They are doing mass calls throughout November, December, January, probably continuing through the year. They have a platform that totally is aligned with what I was just talking about. They are not trying to divide us. They are not trying to put people into camps of wrong and right. They are really tuned in with what do the people want? What do the people need? And for the most part, I'm going to say people don't want to feel afraid, and people don't want to be forced into conformity. People want to live their lives the way that they feel that their lives should be lived. And in all of our diversity, wow, we have conflict. You know, there are so many ways where we rub up against each other, step on each other's toes, want to live our lives in ways that directly oppose how other people want to live their lives. And yeah, we have a lot that we need to figure out, but we also need stories that tell us that that is possible. We need possibility modeling of people being in the heat of conflict and the awkwardness of it all, and finding ways to hear and witness and celebrate and see each other, and not just compromise, but collaborate and create new worlds. And that starts with new words. New words build new worlds. The more we give people the pronouns that they ask for, the more possibilities there are for everybody to experience getting to live in bodies, in their expressions of fashion and aesthetics and attraction and affect in the ways that are natural for them. And that means that everybody can win. Everybody can win. So find the people who are telling the stories that feel like they are giving you something to carry with you, some kind of hope, some kind of spark to take into these times that are surely going to continue to be very challenging. Now, as we move past the new moon, we are moving towards Mars station retrograde on December 5th, which is the same day that Mercury forms its inferior conjunction with the Sun. And inside of the Mercury retrograde cycle, this is a really critical point. So this is when Mercury is passing directly between the Earth and the Sun. So it is actually the closest to us. And Mercury as a symbol is the communicator and the translator of solar influence. And solar influence is life force. This is the creative substance in its totality. And so when Mercury aligns with the Sun, astrologers call this time Cazimi, and it literally means going into the heart of the Sun. And this is when a seed gets planted in a very dark space. So we are a couple days out from the new moon. It is the waxing crescent in Capricorn at this point. Mercury is not visible. It is aligned with the Sun, and there is a seed of consciousness that is being planted in a dark space. And the dark space is the space of the unknown. It's the space of abrupt departure. It's the space of descent. It's the space of feeling confused. It's the space of feeling despair. It's the space of not knowing how this chaotic creativity is going to take shape. So December 5th is a great day to take the day off, to make a plan for yourself and maybe with community to actually just like be in the question of what is being called for right now and how are we being guided into our next steps, and to have some kind of practice that is not necessarily about coming up with a plan in that moment, but is about listening deeply for the inspiration. Because the seed that is being planted right now is a seed that will reconnect with vital energy, with the solar force, and it will be revealed as Mercury stations direct and over the course of the next year. And so as we move into 2025, we're moving into a year, as I mentioned at the beginning of this reading, that has a profound influence of fire. And that includes all of the Mercury retrograde cycles will be either fully or partially in fire signs. And Saturn and Neptune will be making their first ingresses into Aries together. And so there's a lot to be revealed in the coming months and years. But right now, there's some kind of pulse of energetic influence that wants to make itself known that is, I'm going to say, a little bit of an inspiration. And so tune in if you can, get quiet around December 5th. It's a really good time to listen. The other reason to take the day off of work and to get quiet is because as Mars stations retrograde, there can be a really strong feeling of like an abrupt shift in energy. Mars goes retrograde the least frequently out of all of the planets, and because of its retrograde pattern, it can often hit us in surprising ways. Mercury retrogrades happen like clockwork. The outer planets are retrograde half of the year. Our systems are more accustomed to those kinds of periods of slowdown. But when Mars station retrograde, oftentimes there can be a really distinct feeling of losing energy. And sudden reversals can happen, or disruptions in planned forward moving action. Mars retrograde brings an intense focus onto existence and what is happening in the present moment and what's not happening. It can kind of like jar us into a moment of presence that can also be kind of shocking. Now at 6 degrees of Leo, which is where Mars is stationing retrograde, we have a symbol of permanence versus impermanence. So the Sabian symbol for this part of the zodiac is represented by a constellation. And the constellation is the reflection of the one who views it. And so if we are gazing up at the stars, we probably, if we can give it a second, will be struck in awe by the vastness and the enormity of the sky. And to gaze at the stars is a very human, I would say, birthright, and something that our ancestors gleaned so much wisdom from, and that is where this practice of astrology comes from. And when we learn to speak the language of the stars, we learn to speak the language of time, which is much bigger than human life. And so this degree point is really about impermanence and the reality of impermanence that is struck into the consciousness and into the mind as we grapple with our own actual insignificance, and then the ways that we can also become confused about what is significant. But ultimately, we have to remember that we are part of this larger whole. And the focus, the intensity of focus on existence ideally brings us into the vibrancy of the moment. This Mars retrograde is moving from 6 degrees of Leo back to 17 degrees of Cancer. The messages that have been coming through for me about this retrograde are very deeply about the interior and what is personal to every single being out there. And if we get into what is most personal for each of us, we are going to find our way right back to the collective, because as beings with beating hearts, what is most personal to us in our interior is the force of life. It is our breath, and it is our subjective experience of being part of this larger, greater whole. And so to be with what is most personal is to be with our own feelings. It's to be with our own fears. It's to be with our own hopes. It's to be with the ways that we want to nurture and care for who we love and what we dream of. And in this particular retrograde, I think a lot of us are feeling thwarted. And I think that this Mars retrograde is pushing back on many people's ideas of what is in the future and what kinds of plans for action there may be, and putting us into a period of really deep unknown that is asking us to voyage right into our own centers. So this is a time to consider and to really meditate on the responsibility that you have to your own life and to life in general, and stop projecting the fantasies of who you could be if only you could control the world and only you could control others, right? You are here right now. And this moment and this breath is precious, right? This is what Joanna Macy was asking us to tune in with. This is the opportunity. And who knows where we're going to get. We know that if the warmongers succeed in their visions for the future, that we will not be left with a habitable planet for anybody or anything. That is very clear. What do we have right now that is worth celebrating, that is worth awakening for and enlivening for and connecting with? And how do we want to then realign and reorient our actions and activity, this is Mars, towards what really compels us? So Mars rules motivation and impulse and instinct and life force. And as Mars stations retrograde, it will be retrograde until the end of February. It's in its shadow period until May of 2025. And so this next 6 months or so, this is a period of time that is going to be best spent really cultivating your life force. And that means not projecting happiness on a future that is conditional on things that you can't control. It means rewriting stories of what success looks like. It means reallocating your energy and your resources towards what actually builds and serves and feeds the fire of life, right? We've got to fight fire with fire, and we're going to fight their fire power with the fire of life. Now, a couple days after Mars stations retrograde and Mercury makes its conjunction with the Sun, or I'll say the day after Mercury makes its conjunction with the Sun, because that's what begins the next period of Mercury's retrograde cycle. This relates with Prometheus. So here we get back to fire. So the Promethean cycle of a Mercury retrograde starts at the inferior conjunction. And this particular cycle, and it moves through Mercury's station direct all the way to the superior conjunction, which will be in a couple of months. And so this particular cycle is moving, it's a departure from the Epimethean cycle, where we're really focused on the past, where we might not be so forward thinking, where we might be besieged by terror and doubt and misery. And the Promethean cycle of a Mercury retrograde, especially as Mercury will be moving through Sagittarius, is a cycle of impulsivity, experimentation, some amount perhaps of enthusiasm, which doesn't necessarily mean happiness, but there is an energy here. This is also the day that Venus is entering Aquarius, the sign of the future. And remember that Pluto is in Aquarius. So as soon as Venus enters Aquarius, Venus meets Pluto. And as we move into the month of December, so after basically from the 7th of December until the end of the month, now we're working with some different kinds of vibes. So on the one hand, we have Mars retrograde, and this is definitely a slowdown, and this is definitely something that a lot of people are going to be feeling, particularly when it comes to what's next. We don't know what's next. You might not know how to move towards anything that's next. Definitely pay attention to where Leo is in your chart. That is a place where your energy is needing to be reallocated, readjusted, reworked, and revisioned. What do you actually want to be mobilizing for and acting for? But Venus in Aquarius and Mercury entering its Promethean phase are very future oriented. And so I'm going to say that this is bringing us into Capricorn season. And so here is a little bit of a transition from Sagittarius into Capricorn season, because Capricorn season starts with the solstice on December 21st. And I want to include the period of time now that goes all the way to the end of Mercury's retrograde shadow, which is January 2nd. So this is basically a month or so. So December, let's stick with Sagittarius season for a second. From December 7th until the solstice, do I have anything more to say about this period of time? I do. On the 7th, that day exactly, the sun will oppose Jupiter. This is also, as Mercury is entering its Promethean phase, Mercury will square Saturn. And this is it feels like a really interesting kind of tension this period of time. I think a lot of you might be resonating with how I've been feeling recently, some of which I've already described, but there is actually a lot of feeling of excitement. And, I think a lot of people either didn't vote or maybe voted for the Big Orange, not because they agree with his policies or want fascism, but because they want change. I think, and I totally could be wrong, but I think that more people want progressive change than they want regressive conformity. Personal opinion. And I think that progressive movements are going to be building really noticeably and really strongly. I've already noticed it. Like I already said, we've had 8 years of building in resistance to this particular threat, which is not a new threat, and many people have been building for much longer than 8 years. But it does feel like something is shifting in some interesting ways around this time. And I think that as Venus moves into Aquarius and Mercury squares Saturn and Mars stations direct and the Sun opposes Jupiter, all 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th of December, I'm kind of I'm scared and excited. It's the part of me that is an anarchist, punk kind of vibe where I'm chaos is the mother of invention. I didn't come to Earth to live forever. I know I'm going to die. Bring it, bitch. I've got this kind of reckless feeling as I tune in with this astrology, and I wonder if you will too. I do want to say that on December 7th, Embodied Astrology is hosting one of our last workshops of the year. I'm so excited for this workshop. This is it's the last session of the Nebula Lab, which Gabs 404, my beloved colleague, the creative artistic director of Embodied Astrology for the last 5 years, has been hosting. Gabs is a trans artist from Brazil who does really interesting work with astrology. They really come at it from a very creative and experimental kind of space. And as a photographer, they've been working with Neptune. I keep saying I'm going to talk about Neptune. I'll get there. But Neptune has been transiting the last degree of Pisces over 2024 and will be into 2025. And this is the last degree of the zodiac. And in a lot of ways, this transit like talks about the end of the world as we know it, which is not the end of everything, but it is the end of something. And Gabs initiated work with a book called Hospicing Modernity in our working group for Embodied Astrology. And I think that they were introduced to that book by the person who's going to be leading the workshop on December 7th, Danny D'Amelia. So Danny is also a trans artist and performance artist, and they're going to be leading a workshop on radical tenderness. I don't have the description in my mind right now, but I see the image. And I know that in their work as a somatic practitioner and performance artist and poet and really deep feeler and thinker, Danny is going to be inviting us to be with these times of breakdown towards radical care, radical tenderness, exquisite love and presence. As we are with the horrors, right? Like as we are with the grappling and the unknown and the grief, and all of that is welcome. So if you are looking for the places where people are telling stories about something that feels like, wow, there's a future in that, hang out with us on December 7th in the Nebula Lab with Danny and Gabs. And the link to register will be in the show notes, and you can also get the recording if you can't attend live. So I feel a reckless, chaotic intelligence coming through around this time. I feel a lot of progressive momentum coming through around this time. And then we get to Mercury stationing direct on December 15th, which is the day of the full moon in Gemini. So Gemini full moon will be squaring Neptune. Here's Neptune in Pisces. And this is a full moon that it feels very future oriented. It feels very queer. It feels very diverse. It feels like an opportunity to like engage in some fuck shit comedy or something, like the ways that we can resist really profoundly the forces of oppression and suppression through humor and through the more like subversive nighttime activities and the ways that we spread stories amongst ourselves. This feels like a full moon that really wants to uplift and amplify that. And this is also the day of our actual last Embodied Astrology event for 2024. And this is our full moon artistic alchemy workshop with the one and only Janata Petrus, who I am just so grateful to have been able to work with over the last couple of years. Janata is a poet and an author and a playwright and a longtime abolitionist organizer. And the way that she holds space for us in artistic alchemy is really, really generous. And this is a great time to work with the full moon axis in your chart. So the Gemini Sagittarius axis, Janata always brings in prompts and practices for us to reflect and illuminate with the full moon energy. And the full moon will be in Gemini. And I've heard Janata go off about Gemini, so I can tell you already she's going to have a really fire playlist. She's going to have all kinds of fun things for you to do to stretch your mind and work your words. And this is the day that Mercury stations direct. And because Mercury is stationing direct in the sign that is opposite of Gemini and Sagittarius, but Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, then I would say that this is an absolutely amazing full moon to work with writing and to work with communication. And I'm sure that's what Janata is going to be doing. So if you want some support, come to EA. We're always sliding scale. We always have scholarships. No one is turned away for lack of funds. If you can afford to pay, please pay us, because we pay our facilitators well and we provide a lot of scholarship. But we want people to have this, right? Like, this is not about hoarding. This is about sharing and getting the word out. And that is what this full moon is about. It is about sharing information. working in ways that are queer. That means not linear, not logical. It goes all the different directions and it gets creative about it, and everybody does it their own way, and that's what we can celebrate. Jupiter, the ruling planet of Sagittarius, is currently in Gemini, and so Mercury and Jupiter are in what's called a mutual reception with one another, and this really brings a big, generous boost to stories, to words, to minds, to communications, and to ideas about how we get to where we want to go. I'm not focusing right now on what I think the other side or the other sides are doing. My message is for the people who resonate with me. I don't even know what, I mean, I could like tell so many stories about what I think this astrology is going to look like in like political landscapes, but I think it's chaotic. Like, I'm just going to say that. It just feels like a chaotic period of time. And for any of you out there who feel like cautiously, chaotically excited about chaos, like I do, you know, I'm scared of it because I have a Taurus moon, you know, I'm a human being. I've lived my whole life very privileged and very insulated as like a white American. I don't want to lose my stability, but also we've lost so much. So many people have lost so much. And I'm here for a cause. And like, I really feel that right now. Like, I feel like I'm here for a cause. My life is an offering. May it be an offering. As I've already been saying, like, it's time to let go of personal attachment to your own outcomes and really show up for the cause. And this is a full moon to fucking show up for the cause. Like, if people are doing things that you think are helpful and relevant, share them. Broadcast the stories that are going to get us through. And uplift and celebrate what is actually new and what is actually different. Because the right or the fascists or the fundamentalists or the warmongers are not doing anything different. They're not doing anything new. Those guys are doing the same thing that they have been doing forever. They're trying to get you to conform with the fucking ideas that guys like them had 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Like, why is that even interesting? Why is that good? You know what I mean? Let's do something different. Let's do something new. You know what hasn't been done yet? Actual global unity in a human sphere. We are living at a time when the differences of the many diasporas are colliding. Every single person on this planet has been affected, and I'm going to say negatively affected, by displacement, by forced displacement, by being forced to flee, by being literally stolen and enslaved, by being forced to migrate because of not having options to stay where you are. Some people have migrated in ways that maybe were joyful for them, but every single person who's alive right now has been affected on some level by displacement. Even if you live in the place where your ancestors lived forever, the place where you live has been affected by people who have been displaced. And there's so much loss there. There's so much to grieve there. There's so much to argue about there, but there's also opportunity there. Because for the first time in human history, we are all mixed up. And we have ways to communicate with each other. So again, it's like, yes, there's a million pitfalls and horrors and horrible things that we can project into the realms of technology and communication. But also Google Translate can get embedded into all your different apps, and you can actually have a conversation with somebody without speaking their language. And they can have a conversation with you without speaking your language. And there's something really cool about that. So let's do something new. Let's not regurgitate the same old story of conformity and fear and control and like the masses just falling into lockstep with these delusional, mentally ill people who are so full of fear that they can't imagine a more creative outcome where lots of different people get to live in win-win-win situations, being who they are, as they are also learning to be accountable to one another and take care of the resource that makes us all. What would actually be new? What would actually be different, right? There are new ideas and we can have them. And I think that this is what this phase is about. The full moon is square to Neptune. The sun will perfect its square with Neptune a couple days later on the 18th. That can certainly create delusion, illusion, and fog. Be discerning about what kind of stories you're sharing. I know that I need to consistently check this chaotic enthusiasm that I have, because it can be reckless. And I can feel in my own body that as like a fire dominant chart, that I want to go more towards that than I want to be with the feelings. And this square with Neptune is also asking us to be with the feelings. And so it is a time, right, to listen to each other's stories, to share and uplift the stories that feel like they can sustain us and that they can bring us through. It's definitely a time to offer ourselves into the adventures of liminality. And this is where I'm going to be going with Neptune, right? That I already mentioned this with Pisces, and Neptune is associated with Pisces as the modern ruler. Neptune is currently transiting through Pisces, as is Saturn. And the sign Sagittarius, where Mercury is, ruled by Jupiter, who's currently in Gemini, the sign ruled by Mercury, are all square. I didn't say that quite right, but Jupiter is also squaring this full moon. So we have squares by sign, from Mercury, from Jupiter, from the sun, from the moon, creating a lot of mutability in the chart, mutable cross. So adventures in liminality, things are changing. Things are changing. We don't know how they're going to change. We can be intentional about how we want to move through change, but we have to be adaptable. Find comfort in the unknown, right? The unknown is a place of profound comfort if you allow it to be. If you relax and surrender the possibility that you could control the outcomes, the unknown is actually like a big feather bed. The only thing that you know for certain is that you will die, and that everything and everybody that you love will cease to exist at some point. And as we all transition into spirit, there is infinite potentiality as to what that might be. And if we are here with the most generous grace that we can channel through these human vessels and in these human lives, then we give to the space that we will become a part of. So give to yourself in spirit form, right? Like live your life knowing that you are not going to be here forever, and take comfort in that, because that is what is going to give you permission to be who you are and to be proud of who you are and to have a good time being who you are. And this is a period of time as Mercury is stationing direct, and as we move into Capricorn season and the solstice happens on December 21st, this is a period of time to actively lay the groundwork for the future via your receptivity to the current conditions. Okay, lay the groundwork for the future, not by imagining what could happen if other people change, not by putting something off until you have actually the perfect conditions. Lay the groundwork for the future by being receptive to the current conditions. And so that means look at what's happening currently and see the opportunities in it. When I look at what's happening currently in the landscape of the United States, so-called United States, I see a lot of people who really want the promise of US democracy, of the myth that this country stole from the indigenous people and codified into a declaration of independence for some. I see a lot of people who really want independence for all. And because it's independence for all, then people have all different kinds of ideas about what that looks like. But whether these are like disaffected young cis men or queer people or people with uteruses who can give birth, or all different kinds of communities, I think a lot of people want sovereignty. They want independence. They want to feel that they can live as they are. So I'm going to say that this is, you know, again, sorry to be US centric, but I think that there's also something very global in this. This is a time to make this story ours. My colleague Ramon Parrish was saying this the other day, like, we can make this story ours. This is our America, right? They're not the party of inclusion. We are the people who can include. We can work with diversity. We can work with nuance. We can work with complexity. If we see that, okay, there's like a lot of disaffected young male-identified people who have felt like there's no place for them in what the progressive left is fighting for, then that's also an opportunity. That's an opportunity to expand the stories that we're telling, to build bridges, to make friends, to think about how we can make inroads in communities where maybe we have actually built a lot of walls. So how do we lay the groundwork for the future? By being receptive to the current conditions. That means not pretending like they're not there, not fucking hating them and pushing them away, but actually really studying them. And this requires introspective preparation. Examining, how do we uphold what we don't want to continue? I can lay the groundwork for the future by also reworking the ways that I myself move in habits of the past that I don't want to continue. By grieving, by processing, by joining mass calls with the Working Families Party, by getting involved with groups that are doing somatic abolition work and decentering and unwinding from whiteness. There are so many ways that we can work skillfully with the current conditions to lay the groundwork for the future. But we have to be willing to adapt and experiment. And that's what this time is calling for. And as Mercury turns direct, it enters its Promethean phase. So Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give to humanity. And in doing that, he told us, use the fire well. Use it to make offerings to the gods. You know, use it to uplift the parts of your nature that are godly, right? Make fires that everybody can gather around and dance and tell stories and warm themselves and celebrate and feast together. And that is some of what human beings have done for sure. And a lot of what human beings have done has been to misuse our fire power. And this is then what resulted, right? The misuse of power resulted in all of the evils being thrown into the world. So Prometheus, right? Like, we have fire, you know, we're not going to go back to a time, at least not this year, you know, when we didn't have fire. So how do we work with the Promethean impulse? Mercury, as it stations direct, is saying, seize the fire. Contain your anxiety. Cultivate your will, the willpower, right? Will force is associated with fire. Cultivate creativity, creative expression, free expression, dance, theater, art, fashion, poetry, stories, music. Cultivate creativity, because this brings joy. It brings joy to the creators and it brings joy to the audiences. Come together, dance together, make art together, build energy. Share stories that spread fire, right? That spread the fire of the heart. And share stories in ways that bring people to their hearts. And a great way to do that is to tend the hearth. And the hearth is the place that holds the fire. And if we're going to work skillfully with fire, we also need to know how to contain it and how to hold it. And particularly as we move into January, and I'm looking at January 6th, not because of the anniversary it is, but because of the moon and aspects that are happening around that time, there is firepower that is building. And in a lot of ways, in a lot of places, we're going to see that fire get out of control. But if we want sustenance and we want resilience and we want to move through into a time of joyful survival and win-win-win, because I believe we can, so that's the story I'm going to tell, then I'm going to say that this is also a period of time to really work skillfully with fire and to practice containing fire. And that doesn't mean squashing opposition or avoiding conflict. It actually means turning towards conflict so that we can work skillfully with it. By the time this episode goes out, the series with Ramon, who I just mentioned, will be over. So you can't attend live anymore, but you can get the recordings of Constellations of Conflict, which is a 3-part series led by Ramon Gabrielov Parrish. Ramon's an amazing astrologer, a really wonderful teacher, and someone who has worked in the realm of conflict transformation for a long time. And in this series, he is looking through the lens of astrology at transformational conflict and how we work with our internal conflicts, our interpersonal conflicts, and the conflicts that show up in and between our ideologies and that actually really get cemented inside of our institutions. And through the lens of astrology, he's giving us a lot of tools to work with conflict and to work skillfully and generatively with it. And I'm going to say that this period of time really, really needs that. It needs the willingness to be in friction and to be in heat and to grapple with conflict, but to trust that conflict also can help clear, like if we can engage with conflict skillfully, it can help clear the space. A lot of people can't work together because of conflicts that have never been addressed. A lot of people mistrust all kinds of things because of conflicts that have never been addressed. So if we are courageous and turn towards conflict willingly, but in ways that actually, are about tending the hearth and bringing people together, I think that this time can be incredibly productive. And the last thing I'll say just about that in this moment is that Vesta, one of the kind of most profound astrological symbols of containing fire and holding fire, is in Libra as we move through Sagittarius season and into Capricorn season. And then right around this time that I just mentioned a moment ago, Vesta will move into Scorpio. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm going to say that in this window of time, December 7th, all the way until like January, early January, January 2nd or something like that, really fiery time, really potentially very enthusiastic, chaotic time, and also a period of time that we can use very productively when we come together to build fire intelligently. And during this time, flexibility will be one of our biggest assets. And remember, storytelling. The world is created by stories, word consciousness, flexibility, right? Learn new words, build new worlds. All right, so then we get into Capricorn season. The solstice is on the 21st. We enter into the season of Capricorn, and pretty much right away on the, I think it's the 23rd or the 24th of December, it's the 24th of December, Jupiter and Saturn square for the second time. Now, Jupiter-Saturn cycles are important cycles for astrologers. When they are conjunct with one another, it happens every 20 years. And the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions are considered to be like timekeeping conjunctions by astrologers. And so these conjunctions are looked at to delineate periods of time that are about trends in societies and how like the moral framework of society then becomes embodied by the people. And the last time that Jupiter and Saturn came together was on the solstice, December 21st of 2020. So that was shortly after the last general election we had when Biden got in. It was at the end of the last Trump administration. It was in the thick of COVID. And I heard a statistic the other day, and I'm not going to be able to remember it exactly, but it was on Democracy Now! Someone was talking about how the amount of Americans who died because of COVID is a bigger number than all of the Americans who died in like the Vietnam, the Korean War, and the war in Afghanistan or something like that. And in 2020, there was a lot of kind of like reckoning energy, right? So COVID happened. That was the year George Floyd was murdered, and big uprisings around racial justice were happening, or racial injustice and police violence were happening all over the country. And a lot of things got set into motion in 2020 that now, as we are getting into the opening square of Jupiter and Saturn, are being challenged. And so I've heard lots of people talk about like, you know, like movement organizers or activists, you know, talk about like, oh, people were so, you know, engaged and fired up like in 2020 or in 2016, and I got all these donations, but then they dried up and people stopped, and there hasn't been necessarily like the follow through or the momentum that a lot of people wish would have happened. And I think many folks out there probably agree on some level that the Democratic Party and institution in some ways like thwarted that movement because a lot of people went back to sleep. Biden got in and liberals were like, problem solved. But the problem wasn't solved. And the problems that were here, right, Pandora's box of problems, couldn't have been solved by a president, couldn't have been solved by the Democratic Party, couldn't really be solved by politics. They're problems that actually need to be solved by people and by the people. And as Jupiter squares Saturn, this is the second time that they've formed this aspect over the course of the last several months. And the outer planets often have multiple iterations of their aspects because of retrograde. So we got a square from Jupiter to Saturn August 19th, 2024. The second one is Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2024. And the first two squares are as Jupiter is transiting Gemini and Saturn is transiting Pisces. Where this cycle began, when Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct on the solstice of 2020, was at the very first degree of Aquarius, which is where Pluto is currently. And so as the second Jupiter-Saturn square forms, Pluto is tenanting the same degree where they were at the beginning of their cycle. Now, the opening square is akin to the first quarter moon in the lunation cycles. And for those of you that are familiar with working with the moon, you probably know that this is a period of necessary challenge. And so if the new moon or the conjunction, Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct in 2020, akin to a new moon moment, that is a moment of a cycle starting because something else has ended. And endings are beginnings, and beginnings are endings. And a lot of us, I'll put myself in this category too, misperceive when an actual beginning is, because a lot of times we think that the beginning is when we notice it. But actually, a lot of times the beginning is when there's an impulse that creates the need to notice something, but noticing might not happen until there's a real challenge or there's some kind of like growth of awareness. And so the first quarter of the lunar cycle is about something coming into consciousness. So something starts at the conjunction, but what is starting, we don't really know because it's so subjective in a lot of ways and unseen. The new moon, you can't see the moon, right? Because the moon is with the sun. And it's a period of time that is often described as deeply internal and subjective. It's like you're just in your experience of a thing. So in 2020, we were in an experience of a thing. And now in 2024, at the end of the year, that thing is becoming really obvious. So what is becoming obvious in this new cycle of growth that began in 2020, in this cycle that is about changing the frameworks of society, shifting ethics, shifting morals, shifting stories, so that the way that society is governed and how we embody our culture starts to shift. And so this opening square is a challenge. And Saturn is currently in Pisces, where Neptune is. And as we get into Capricorn season, Capricorn is an earth sign, but Capricorn is also ruled by Saturn. And so earth and water, Pisces is a water sign, are complementary energies. They both pull us down and in. And Capricorn, as a sign ruled by Saturn, then is going to be deeply influenced by where Saturn is and what Saturn is doing. And Saturn is currently in Pisces, and it's moving towards a conjunction with Neptune. Neptune is also in Pisces towards the last degrees of the sign. And Saturn and Neptune won't make their conjunction exactly until 2026. As they both enter the sign Aries, but they are very close to one another right now. And so this Capricorn season is totally flavored by Saturn's tenure in Pisces. And what Saturn does is it brings doubt, it brings restriction, it brings hardship, it brings challenge, it brings reality. Harsh tokes on the bong of reality. Saturn in Pisces, like, wow, the dream is really heavy, man. Like, this is really rough. And the environment is breaking down. There's climate collapse that's happening. Multiple species are going extinct every single week, and human beings are making ourselves extinct. It sucks. It's fucking bleak. You can argue with me, but like, that's also the reality of it. It's a hard time in so many ways. And if we refuse to look at that, then we're fooling ourselves and we're not helpful to the situation. And Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, I think they're asking us to be with the grief, to be with the despondency, to be with the despair, to be with the reality that human beings have made a fuck ton of mistakes. And right now we are in the shit. And Saturn is squaring Jupiter. And Jupiter is an expansive energy, Santa Claus of the zodiac, the benefic energy, the gift giver, the light bringer. Jupiter wants us to grow and to become more conscious and to see that the opportunities are also here. Now, Jupiter is currently in a sign of its debilitation in Gemini. It is also retrograde. And so this particular Jupiter-Saturn square doesn't necessarily feel like Jupiter energy is winning out in terms of seeing the big picture and feeling hopeful about things. This is a time of like 10,000 sorrows. Jupiter in Gemini expands distraction. There's like a million things going on. Jupiter retrograde has to turn the energy inwards, and we might be really kind of in a place of like total overwhelm, not knowing how to work with what's happening, being really internal about it, not knowing how to engage, this kind of thing. And we can work skillfully with this energy, again, by really offering ourselves to the sacrifice, which is to make sacred of our greatest dreams, our biggest wishes, right? So all the ways that we might put off happiness and delay satisfaction and think that ambition and success are like somewhere else, that is for the fire right now. And there are ways that we can come together, and there are words that we can share with one another that spread stories of resilience, of survival, of creativity, and ingenuity. This Jupiter-Saturn square is also arriving in a waning moon cycle. On the day after Christmas, in the waning crescent moon in Scorpio, Mercury will perfect its opposition to Jupiter and its square to Saturn. We have Venus in Aquarius squaring Uranus around this time. And we are also building towards the second of three oppositions between Mars and Pluto. This to me feels like a violent time. It feels like also a time of a lot of resistance. And we have to resist through cultivating bigger awareness. And again, by really working to receive, to be receptive to current conditions. So we can examine the systemic failings as we examine the ways that we can work together and individually for reparation and change. We can build enthusiasm to be with God. We can build enthusiasm by engaging in devotion and sacrifice. Now, the word sacrifice, right, to make sacred, is a word that is so often associated with Pisces. And when we're working with Pisces energy, we are working with liminality. We are working with the promise and the guarantee of non-permanence. As we move towards the Capricorn new moon on December 30th, this is a new moon at 9 degrees of Capricorn. It's conjunct the asteroid Vesta. The Sabian symbol for this degree is an albatross feeding from someone's hand. And the meaning here is that we can connect with one another and we can draw what is unlike us towards us in harmony and in reciprocity by radiating peace. So to feed a wild bird from your hand, you have to be able to emanate from your heart and pose no threat to that being. And so this is a time of danger, this is a time of threat, this is a time of precarity. But if we can orient internally towards surrender, towards devotional practice, towards the offering of our lives and our energies and our attitudes to that which we most deeply believe in, and for me, that is love. I think that love is the universal substance. If I can offer my fear to that fire of love, if I can meditate on the inevitability of my own death, if I can take solace and courage through the examples that I have seen, and probably a lot of you have seen over the last 14 months as a genocide has been live streamed through our devices, to see the way that Palestinians love each other, are totally committed to their own liberation, feed each other, dance together, and continue to uplift their love for their homeland and for one another. that for me is like, what the fuck do I have to complain about? If I have an opportunity to give what I have to love, then the opportunity is right now. And it's way easier said than done. This is a practice. So it is a practice to arrive in our lives with humility, with devotion, and with love, even as we are confronted by fear, even as we are confronted by threat, even as we are confronted by the most massive military in the entire world that has been totally pitted against us as civilians and completely pitted against human life in so many places and non-human life everywhere. Keep the flame burning in your heart. Gather with people. Gather with people around stories, around song, around creativity, around art. Gather with people in queer ways, in ways that share little ideas of how we might get through. Gather with people. As we get towards the new moon, Chiron is stationing direct in Aries. The USA has a natal Chiron and Aries placement. I think about Chiron and Aries. So first of all, Chiron is often called the wounded healer. And Chiron's mythic story is a story of displacement, of like not belonging in a lot of ways and needing to find belonging through attending to your own like upliftment and growth and really continuing to focus on healing and being of service to others. Chiron's myth teaches us that some wounds cannot be healed in a lifetime and that many wounds are ancestral and that the ways that we work to heal also become our greatest gifts and teachings for others. And so when we encounter Chiron energy, we can often see it through deep intergenerational pain and harm. Aries as an energy is a fire energy. It is often associated with masculinity, as it is associated with the planet Mars, and Mars in its little glyph is the sign for the masculine. Masculinity can exist in all bodies, and it is all kinds of things, right? So that yang energy is a projecting energy. It's an assertive force. It is what gets us out of bed in the morning and gets us moving towards our priorities. It is warrior energy, and it is a deeply sacred, necessary energy and needs to be celebrated and needs to be uplifted. And it can also become really excessive, and we see that in our current culture. We are living at a time where the embodiment of wounded masculinity is pervasive, and the harms of individualism are pervasive. And so Chiron and Aries in the US birth chart, and right now in the Chiron return of the US, or the Chiron in Aries transit everywhere, might be highlighting the wounds of toxic masculinity and harmful individualism, which can exist in all bodies, not just those who have penises or identify as men. And this is an opportunity for us to be on a healing journey and to wake up. We need to deal with the root and systemic causes. The systemic causes have to do with separation from the earth, separation from one another, separation between the mind and body. This leads to attitudes of dominion and domination. It leads to othering. That gives rise to ways of being like patriarchy and misogyny and supremacy, and it harms everybody. Even the people who appear to benefit from it and who get really jacked up on that energy are harmed by it because they also don't have a soft place to come back to where they can be vulnerable. They also cannot express their queer potentiality and fabulousness. They also are not allowed to become disabled and old and needy, which we all are and will be. And so Chiron, as it stations direct, right around the new moon in Capricorn, will be trine with Mercury in Sagittarius, and Mercury is finishing up its retrograde shadow. And this is also when Mars will make its second opposition to Pluto. Where are my notes? I don't know. Let's see. When Mars made its first opposition, because I don't have my notes here right now. But I will say that Mars has already made one opposition to Pluto. That opposition happened at the very last degree of Cancer when Mars was transiting there. And Pluto was at the very last degree of Capricorn sometime recently. And the second opposition happens January 2nd as Mars is at the first degree of Leo, retrograding back into Cancer, and Pluto is at the first degree of Aquarius. So all of this is happening. Jupiter is squaring Saturn, Chiron is stationing direct, Mercury is finishing its retrograde shadow as it is trine with Chiron, opposing Jupiter and squaring Saturn, and Mars is opposing Pluto, and it's the new moon. Then we move towards January 6th. And January 6th is the first quarter lunation in Aries, 16 degrees of Aries, sextile with Jupiter and conjunct with Chiron. A couple days before that, Mars in Leo will trine the North Node in Aries. And this energy to me feels really intense. So I don't know what folks are planning for January 6th. It is an anniversary of a sort. I have been really inspired by a video that Alexis Pauline Gumbs put out last week, and she was calling us to make plans for our own first 100 days of the new administration. She was talking about this being a time when the incoming president will often talk about, what they're going to do in their first 100 days. And in the first 100 days, a lot of things get put into action. And certainly with the incoming administration, we can expect that the first 100 days are going to be terrifying and brutal. But we can also make plans for our first 100 days. And I'm thinking a lot about this, and I've been thinking a lot about January 6th, looking at this astrology. And again, I'm like, what's chaotic and reckless and what's actually creative and a good idea? So I'm just going to put this out there, take it or leave it. I'm going to say that January 6th, 2025 is a great day to have a fucking raging queer rave. It's a great day to dress in drag. It's a great day to subvert. And we can be assured that the forces of toxic masculinity and harmful patriarchy will be putting on their own show. And like I said before, they're not doing anything new. Everything they're doing has been done before. It's old, it's boring, it's stupid. What can we do that's new? Aries is an energy that wants something new. And so how do we collectively turn towards what is actually new, what is actually different? And in the whole list of transits that I just gave you, there is a lot of energy to push back against institutional power. There's a lot of energy to invest inside of collectivism. There's a lot of energy for expanding long-term thinking and strategizing. And there's a lot of heat that is building to that point. So maybe you want to do something with that. Now on January 6th, Mars retrogrades back into Cancer. And then Mars will be in Cancer over the course of the next couple of months. It stations direct at the end of February and will be leaving Cancer towards the end of April. But when Mars is in Cancer, there is an increased vitality and vigor to protect and defend what is precious and what is fragile. This is an energy that really serves the containment that we create around the most vulnerable. This is a period of time where there's going to be a lot of movement and a lot of organizing to protect those who will be most impacted the quickest and the most extremely and severely by the new administration's policies. This is a great time to donate to all kinds of organizations that are working for immigrant rights, that are working to protect queer and trans people, that are working to protect bodily sovereignty for birthing people, that are working to protect the environment, because these are all places where the new administration is attacking and really trying to destroy. So as Mars moves into Cancer and we are still in Capricorn season and we are moving towards the Cancer full moon on January 13th, Mercury will then also move into Capricorn. And the whole reading up until now, there's been a lot of fire, but at this point, things go way into the earth and to the water. Venus will enter Pisces as Mercury leaves its shadow at the beginning of January. So Venus will be in Pisces at this time. And then we have a pretty significant shift on January 11th as the nodal axis, which has been moving through Aries and Libra, also shifts now into Pisces and Virgo, which means that we're going to have eclipses in the seasons of Pisces and Virgo over the next 2 years. These eclipses will extend into 2027. They will be layered with eclipses in Leo and Aquarius. I think we have another eclipse in the Aries Libra axis, but now we have eclipse energy really taking up residence in Pisces and Virgo. So the feeling that I have here is that we are living at a time of climate breakdown, and any administrations, any governments, any groups of people who are promoting firepower through war are accelerating climate breakdown. There's huge carbon offset from bombs and from guns. All of the greed and the hoarding and the cars that we want and the big houses and all the money people are trying to collect, all that does is contribute to climate breakdown. And the Anthropocene is resulting from the last 500 years and legacies of colonization, the transatlantic slave trade, and the deep and totally catastrophic and totally disgusting misuse of power. But there is no power greater than God, and God is change, and change is universal order. And when I tune in with this part of the astrology, and then I think about what's coming next in 2025, I think God is present, change is present. And when we work skillfully with change, then we are with God. And that is what can give us enthusiasm, right? This word that Sagittarius loves. So our survival depends on our collaboration and capacity to work well with diversity. As I've said before, forced conformity is unnatural, and the ways that we are being asked to conform right now are totally against the environment. When we can find unison and synchronicity with one another to act for the best interest of the earth, then we are moving with God. But if we are forcing ourselves, squashing ourselves into boxes because we're conforming in fear, and that fear is then leading us to hate other people, to fight other people, to impose rules upon their bodies and their existence, then we are internalizing a mind-body illness and mutation of human capacity. So true inclusivity, I think, is what Mars in Cancer wants. And I'm speaking as a person that has natal Mars in Cancer. Astrologers will talk about this being a debilitated placement for Mars because it can be hard to work with your anger, because you don't want to get angry at people, because you don't want to shut them out, because you don't want to lose the bond. And sometimes that can result in stifling your own anger, which can then result in kind of like hysterical outbursts or really emotional expressions of anger. But Mars in Cancer is also an opportunity to really work with anger as a productive energy, as an energy that catalyzes and galvanizes and fortifies and also warns us and lets us know that something is wrong. And the feelings of anger don't always produce the most logical thoughts. And so we want to be careful when we feel angry. Like, what are we actually angry about? And we want to let that take us very deeply towards the causes of our actual anger. And usually the cause has some kind of hurt inside of it and something that needs to be tended and mended or repaired. Venus is in Pisces during this time, the sign of its exaltation. And Venus in Pisces really asks us to tune in with sublime, exquisite, and pervasive love. Venus will be forming conjunctions with Saturn and with Neptune. Venus's conjunction with Saturn is just a couple days before we get into Aquarius season, and we'll conjunct Neptune after we get into Aquarius season. But this is definitely a time to really tune in with the ways that we can love beyond barriers, love beyond boundaries, and to think about, what does true inclusion actually require? True inclusion actually requires having clear boundaries. It requires discernment. To give room for everybody to be as they are also means that some attitudes and behaviors aren't welcome. And there's a difference between asking people to be accountable to their impact and forcing them to conform to something. Learning accountability with one another is emotional and intellectual maturity. Forced conformity just deadens the emotional and the intellectual capacities. When we can look at our capacities for harm and understand that we have to be accountable to our own impact, and that part of the way that we're going to do that is by other people giving us feedback about how it feels, to be with us, or what we said or what we didn't say or what we did or what we didn't do. That's maturing. That's the capacity to be in friction. It's uncomfortable to be a human being in relationship. There's a lot of discomforts that are just going to be part of life. And some people out there think that they can erase all of the discomforts by putting boxes around everything and trying to control everything and thinking that they can control an outcome. But whatever that is leading to doesn't sound good to me personally. Whether that is a conformist state where, everybody needs to wear gray and navy suits, and people with uteruses have to be the birthing vessels of people with penises and don't get to have any autonomy on their own and queerness can't exist, or whether that's living in an underground bunker while the whole world fucking burns. Why? What is interesting about that? What's actually satisfying about a Tesla truck? We can do better than this. We can have lives that are creative, that are dynamic, that are fulfilling, that are win, 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 but they require us to work skillfully together, and that requires us to be in discomfort sometimes. So this is a period of time to get intimate with discomfort. What makes you push something away? Where do you become conflict avoidant? What makes you collapse and hide? How can you lean into your growth potentials right now and really work to realize what we could be? Their goals are to divide and conquer, to conquest, to force conformity. Our goals are abolition. Our goals are wild creativity. Our goals are something that has been imagined and we can realize it. Our goals are something that has been imagined and maybe realized in certain pockets, but never in a big way. What if we could have a future where you didn't have to work 8 to 12 to 15 hours a day? What if we could have a future where you didn't have to spend all of your life energy trying to make money for somebody else? What if we could have a future where there was great public transportation and we didn't have to continue to invest in fossil fuels? What if we could have a future where everybody is fed? Soften your heart in the resistance. Love fearlessly. Death is absolutely certain. Life is a gift. And that's where I'm going to leave it. And I want to offer 2 pieces of other people's words. I meant to read this first one at the end of Sagittarius season, but I was talking and forgot. So I mentioned her already. Alexis Pauline Gumbs, I think, is one of the great spiritual leaders of our times. And this book, M. Archive, After the End of the World, is about survival, about creative survival. I love this book because it's written through the archives of the elements. So this is from the archive of fire, and something that I want to offer to us in Sagittarius season especially, but as we go into 2025, when the fire element is going to get real strong. Definitely also think about this around the Gemini full moon, okay, on December 15th. At first, nobody signed up for the courses, some knowing it would add them to surveillance lists, make it harder to fly, insert clicks into their phone conversations, make their windows more than windows. And some didn't need to know that, already having told themselves that freedom wasn't allowed specifically, so they wouldn't have to ponder the consequences. But eventually they showed up with the only permitted writing utensil, which was the crayon, melting in their hands. Soon enough, they realized they would have to memorize everything, internalize all of it, keep it in their bodies. Soon enough, there would be nowhere else to keep anything anyway. And the people watching eventually saw the patterns. They knew to watch for singing and the radiance vibrating off the skin of the student teachers. Many felt so attracted, they begged to go into deep cover to infiltrate the courses, and each and every one was welcomed and converted. Freedom is not a secret. It's a practice. It's contagious. The would-be infiltrators could not get the songs out of their skin. They could not resell out the places where they had internalized freedom. They could not undo the implications of the rituals they thought they were sneaking into. And that's how, one at a time, the watchers became the watched. The new attractors of their bewildered colleagues, pushed seemingly by their desire to crack the core, but actually it was their desire to access freedom. People called it a cult and a misguided fad. Stand-up comedians compared the sessions to key parties with swingers. Even radicals dismissed it as just hopeful and insufficient as 1970s feminist consciousness-raising groups. Religious leaders just thought they were Baha'i. But eventually, the curriculum was everywhere, transmitted between roommates and on buses with the tenderness of love. There were children showing up qualified to teach all the advanced courses. They needed bigger and bigger spaces. So they started to meet outside, and then they didn't need classrooms at all because the practices were jumping off everywhere, not without effort, but without force, all day through their eating and conversations. Sometimes they stopped and marveled about how thoroughly they had replaced the story that was there before, but usually they just stayed in the practice and watched the world transform. Think about that at the Gemini full moon. Think about that throughout Mercury's retrograde in Sagittarius. Think about that as we move into 2025 and into a season of big fire. Think about the practices that will transform. Think about how they'll spread and how you'll be part of that. And join Embodied Astrology. Join one of our memberships. Come hang out with me every Monday in Somatic Space. We do practices that leave us shining and smiling almost every week. Maybe some of these practices you could share. You can braid it into the things that you do. Maybe you have practices that you want to bring into our space that we can get inspired by, and let's mix it up. So then I'm going to leave you with a passage from Kyra Jewel Lingo's books, We Were Made for These Times, 10 Lessons for Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption. Very timely book. This is the poem that begins chapter 7, which is called Calmly Facing the 8 Worldly Winds. And the poem wasn't written by Kyra Jewel, it was written by Maddie Weingast, called Chapa, the Archer, from The First Free Woman, Poems of the Early Buddhist Nuns. My sisters, the thing that breaks and leaves sharp edges, that cut you from the inside, that's not the heart. That's the house you built, out of all the pretty things other people told you, and the strange promise that what is felt today will still be felt tomorrow. But such houses are built to fall apart. And when they do, the heart must take to the open road and leave the past behind. Look me in the eye, my sister. You are more than your laughter and your sighs. You are more than your rage and your tears. You are much more than your body. So I leave you with that at the end of Capricorn season, recording for you from Scorpio season. Wherever you are accessing this, whatever time, whatever place you are, I hope that anything that I've offered here is in service to you, in service to your deepest benefit, your greatest benefit, and therefore in service to the greatest benefit of all, because we are much more than our bodies. We belong to the earth, we belong to one another, we are part of waves and currents that are much bigger than we can ever know in our minds, and the opportunity is right now. This life is precious. Let's be here for it. Thank you for tuning in. If you liked this, appreciated this transmission, definitely check out your horoscopes for your sun, moon, and rising sign throughout Sagittarius and Capricorn season. I'm going to go into recording those next. Those are going to be offerings of embodied awareness and practice. And also check out your year ahead readings. You can get 2024's reading at a discount now. You can pre-order your 2025 reading. Those will be sent to you by the beginning of the year. And I am wishing you all the best in this season and in this time and beyond. Bye for now.